Welcome back to another video here, guys, and in this video I'm going to show you how I put together these Bioactive green tree python hatchling tanks from scratch. So before we kick off this video is proudly brought to you by Fish Organics and Reptile Supplies. Corey did me a really solid favour and supplied me some Bioactive kits to use inside of these tanks. Did tweak a couple of things for my liking, but they're a great starter kit to get going, and they are available pretty much across Australia nowadays. So there's a few places around that are getting them around, so if you haven't asked for them already at your local pet shop or your reptile supply shop, probably good for you to ask them to see if they can get in contact with Corey at Fish Organics and Reptile Supplies and see if they can start stocking these awesome kits. Alrighty guys, let's jump into the video and see how I put this together. So true to my current fashion, I made up some rolls with Beyond Printing in Brookvale and had them print out some pictures that I took in Dorrigo. So these are from some rainforest areas and stuff that I saw up there, which I thought, you know what, these kind of images would be perfect for some green tree python enclosures. Now, seeing as it's only 2 tanks and I kind of want to be able to look down the side, I just had one big image printed with kind of essentially a cut down the middle of it. And I had these printed so I could put them on the inside of the ExoTerras. So unlike the other ones that I have had done in my ExoTerras, I decided to put these on the inside. Couple of reasons. It kind of just takes out that gloss that the glass will provide if you put them on the outside of the ExoTerras. And also it just kind of, I don't know, just kind of makes it look a little bit neater, a little bit more matte, just kind of gives it a bit of a nicer backdrop overall. These tanks in particular, because I'm not exactly looking at them from, you know, all 3 sides essentially, like, you know, some of the ExoTerras that have kind of got other tanks side by side. I want to be able to kind of like look down the side of these tanks and almost have kind of like 5 foot of little bit of rainforest essentially there. So as you can see here, I'm kind of wiring up all my lights and bits and pieces now. I thought I'd get this done early while the tanks are empty. It's probably the smartest thing to do, just because once the tanks are full, they're going to be way more heavy to move. And as you can see, those kind of like timber shelves that I've got on top here, they are actually slidable. So I can access the Boyd's lights to the tanks below. I decided to seal in these tanks pretty well too, so taking out a bit of the mesh just by using some black core flute, nothing fancy here, but I just thought this would hold a little bit more heat inside these boxes and a little bit more humidity. Obviously glass boxes, they tend to leak out heat very, very well, and also humidity with all this ventilation, so I'm not 100% sealing them in, but I decided that I'd actually kind of seal them in reasonably well, probably about 80% with a bit of black core flute. So I was going to use a radiant heat panel, but it just couldn't get up to heat, so I decided to use these infrared deep heat projectors instead, which seem to be doing the job really well nowadays. I've just got these guys hooked up to a really simple on-off thermostat made by Reptile One. I believe it's called an Easy Stat, and that just does the job for me. So here we can see I'm actually starting to unbox Corey's actual kits. Now this is the exciting part. I love doing this sort of stuff. And wiring up lights and that, I find that quite boring, but actually getting creative and putting together Bioactive terrariums is always good fun. And as you can see, these kits come with a big bag of leaves inside of these. I've got a 3 foot and a 4 foot tank kit here, so I kind of upsize them a little bit for what you might want to do. And they come with a big bag of these hydro balls or lyrical balls or whatever you want to call them, basically your drainage layer. He's also got these awesome little boxes here with some live cultures in there. It was a bit hard to catch on camera, but I got all sorts of things like earthworms, slaters, springtails, all sorts in there. So there's a fair bit of gear that can go into here to kind of keep these environments nice and healthy. On top of that, we've got tons of this cocoa peat sort of soil mix. There's other things in there as well as I also got some thunder peat and all sorts of stuff to add into here as well. So these all come in, I believe, 5 litre bags, and you can kind of stack them on top of each other. And his kits also come with a piece of fly screen as well for you to actually use as your drainage layer or separation barrier. So as you can see here, we're going to start with the drainage layer. This is the most important part. You need to keep all of your soil out of this so the water can actually drain away. And as I said, I did kind of upsize the kits for the size of the tanks. So I've only got a 2 foot tank and a 3 foot tank, but I got a 3-foot kit for the 2-foot tank, and I got a 4-foot kit for the 3-foot tank. So the reason I do this is just I like a little bit of a thicker drainage layer and thicker soil layer, and then that way you kind of got a bit more gear to actually put in there. These kits are an awesome bit of gear though, for something to just be able to pull off a shelf. There's not exactly anything else like this on the Australian market, or if there is, there's nothing that I've found, that's for sure. So after putting down the drainage layer, I'm just going to put the separation barrier, the fly screen mesh in. This is what's going to stop all the soil getting down the bottom. I like to try to make sure that it has a nice tight fit around the corners as well. I'd rather a little bit of excess fly screen personally around the edges. That's what's good with this kit, is it's kind of cut a bit bigger than what you're going to need, and especially when you're upsizing the actual tank sizes. So here you can see I'm actually going to put all of the soil into this one big bucket and give it a bit of a mix. So I'm getting all of Corey's soil into here, as well as the bioactive soil that I got from him as well. I did order that as an extra. That's got all that cool thunder peat and worm castings and all sorts of gear in there. So that'll keep the plants nice and happy. And then I'm going to add a few of my own things into here as well. So as you may have seen, as we were opening up these bags, there was a bunch of bark in the bottom there. That's just some nice big wood chips that I had lying around from doing the blue tongue pit outside. I thought, you know what, I'm going to add some of those in there just to kind of bulk it out a little bit and give the slaters and stuff, some timber that's actually going to start rotting in the enclosure for them to chew on. So up next, I'm going to add in the organic substrate. This is the good stuff. This is the stuff that you really want to get inside of your terrarium, because this is full of all the good nutrients and stuff that's going to help your plants thrive. Now, to keep the soil nice and fresh, I'm actually going to add in a good portion of horticultural charcoal. So this essentially just is a bit of a soil improver, as I'd call it. It kind of just keeps it from getting real nasty and real boggy and stanky. So after adding this in, we've essentially got most of the gear that I want to pop in there. So I'm just going to give it a good big stir up before we start adding it into these terrariums. So from there, I basically just got a big container and started pouring this substrate into there. And man, it starts to look pretty good in there. It starts to look a bit more like a forest floor. And once I smooth it out, you can kind of see the depth of it. So it's almost kind of coming up to that bottom black lip of the terrarium. There's a little bit of a gap there, but that's good because we're going to be stacking a whole bunch of leaf litter and things in here as well after we start putting our vines in. So vines and roots and things were the main sort of point of call for me. I collected a whole bunch of these ages ago, and as you can see with the background, I really wanted to kind of match the background with all those sort of tree roots and things coming down and kind of gnarly vines and things going everywhere. So that was my main sort of thing. I wanted to make this look like the forest floor where you usually see juvenile green tree pythons when it comes to videos and photos and things like that. I did get a whole bunch of these uprights though, so I decided to kind of cut them into position to kind of be able to be nice little uprights, really be able to make some vertical opportunities for these green tree pythons to cling to. More often than not, you see everybody just doing straight horizontal perching, and for me, I wanted to give all sorts of different options in these little tiny terrariums, because you know what, these are little tiny hatchling snakes, but I want to be able to make it feel like they're really at home in their natural habitat in here and give them all sorts of opportunities. Not all sorts of branches in a green tree python enclosure should be just horizontal. I think you should be doing verticals and diagonals and different thicknesses and all sorts. And this is going to be able to let the snakes choose where they want to go, and my little snakes, they choose different positions all the time. Most of these were held into place either by just sheer force against the roof or in different sort of positions, and where I needed to, I just cable tied bits and pieces together. I was pretty lucky. Most of the plants that I actually wanted to put inside of these terrariums, I'd just been buying as house plants for ages, and I'd been having a few things kicking outside that I'd used in previous builds and stuff like that. Sometimes you'll find if a plant's not doing good, I'll actually take it outside and see if it bounces back there. And that's what I did for this build too. So basically with this one, I popped in a few plants that I really decided that I liked. I really like these kind of, I can't remember what they're called. They're either a ladyfinger palm or a rapis palm. they do really well inside of terrariums. I've got one in the Boyds that is doing fantastic, as well as the pile of palms. They're always a go-to for me. I always just seem to be able to make them thrive. There's also a couple of little ferns that I wanted to try in here as well. Now, ferns for me are definitely hit and miss. I find some do good, some do bad. It all just depends. But all of these plants I did actually have just sitting inside of these terrariums prior to actually using them in here. So I could see that they were doing pretty good. So I thought I would be onto a bit of a winner, already having the plants kind of adjusted to the lights. Now here you can see me adding in a whole bunch of leaf litter. Now the leaves that come in Corey's kits are fantastic, but I actually wanted to save them for some of my arid enclosures because I believe that's a bit more suited to where those sort of like long, thin, spindly gum leaves come from. I did use a few of them in there though because I like the kind of variance in there, but I did use a big bag of leaf litter that I'd saved from my in-laws' front lawn from a different type of eucalypt. One of the last pieces of the puzzle here is of course the cleanup crew. I'm adding these guys in very, very gingerly, and I think I did notice here that we actually had a few little things like some little millipedes and stuff in here as well, which I thought was a really cool added touch. And yeah, there's such an important and vital role of these little systems, and of course you really hope that they reproduce and multiply in there. And here you can see a little bit of a close-up of some of the worms and springtails and bits and pieces crawling around. So yeah, good little kits that they come with. I think it's really cool that they come with a big variety of types of cleanup crew. It kind of feels like it makes it a bit more of an ecosystem when you've got a bit of variety in there like that. So after all of those little guys went in there, I decided to give it a good watering down here. This is definitely one of the important parts to do for any plants, regardless of when or where you're planting plants, whether it be in a garden or in a terrarium. It's always good to kind of water them in and just kind of give them somewhere to set. It kind of helps form all the soil nicely around them as well. You'll notice here as well, as far as lighting goes for these plants, I'm literally just using two 9-watt Arlec downlights. It's really nothing fancy. They're set to, I believe, 5000 Kelvin, so they're not even a full 6500 Kelvin like a daylight spectrum. And this is because forest floors don't get a lot of light, so I'm just trying to keep it a little bit dimmer in here and also not blast these snakes with really harsh light. So another piece of equipment that I've now been using in these terrariums for I think over 6 weeks now is a bit of terrarium fertilizer that Fish Organics and Reptile Supplies actually make as well. This is safe for your reptiles and amphibians, and yeah, it's just a good little added boost of nutrients to these plants. And all of these plants, bar one, actually are still doing really well inside of these terrariums 6 weeks on. And I think that's just because I chose a really poor little fern and yeah, just didn't like me. That's that one in the bottom left, bottom right there. So all the other ferns and everything are kicking on, doing really well, and I think I could owe that to a fair bit of this fertilizer and just a good little watering regime as well. So I did decide to actually put UVB above these guys, and I went with the Get Your Pet Right Forest T5 Globe. It's a 7% UVB. It's also got heaps of beneficial UVA as well, and I just put it in a little 2-foot fixture that I had kicking around, and I split it across the two terrariums so not to blast the whole terrariums with it. But this just went and gave them a kind of section that essentially the snakes can use if they want to get a little bit of UVB. It is quite often that you do see these little green tree pythons hanging out in little dappled daylight and stuff like that, especially for young snakes, so I thought I'd try to mimic that. I also went with the Get Your Pet Right Forest water bowls as well. So these water bowls are awesome because they're nice and dark in colour, so they kind of blend into the forest floor for me, but they're also one of the easiest water bowls to clean. That is something that I keep promoting for these bowls, and it's fact. I find them just so easy to clean. They've got the smoothest texture on them, so you can actually clean them up real nice. One of the final pieces of the puzzle here as well was actually a rain drip system. So I've made these before, and I have got a video here that I'll link to the Boyd's Forest Dragon rain drip system that I made, but basically it's just using some cheap irrigation from Bunnings and a dosing pump, an aquarium dosing pump, and some sort of reservoir container. So very simple to do, but essentially I used this 10-litre container here as a bit of a water reservoir, and I happen to have a spare aquarium dosing pump kicking around. This particular one is a Bluetooth model, so you can actually log in and change all the settings and things like that on there, and I can manually mist just via my phone. But basically you clip it all together using I'm using airline here, or aquarium dosing line rather, very much the same. I'm just using straight up tap water inside of this reservoir, but basically what this is going to be able to let me do is just kind of create a little bit of a light rain system through here. It's not going to be anything crazy like a Mist King system or anything like that, but what it is going to allow me to do is just kind of create a little bit of extra humidity inside of these boxes, and I can kind of just set it to different days, different times, all that sort of stuff as well. So for me, I've just got it on a bit of a simple cycle where it comes on every 4 days and drops about 400 ml of water into these enclosures. So it's not much when you think about it, but it'll come on for a period of time where it just kind of drips down like this, just kind of creating a nice light natural rainfall, which is really good for these little snakes and just something else to enrich them a little bit. And yeah, I really get a kick out of it, and I love seeing it come on over night time and seeing these guys start cruising around and get a little bit more active with it. It's also cool because sometimes you actually see the snakes physically going and drinking from the leaves. So that's something that I have noticed as well, and I think is really, really awesome. It's not very often that I get to see those sorts of behaviour, especially if I had these little snakes still in just these plastic tubs. So yeah, something else that I just really wanted to add into this system and be able to check out. I put one of my favourite hatchies, Banana, into the enclosure to actually check it all out. And he seemed to, well, I'm assuming it's he, I haven't actually sexed the snake, but they seem to have really, really enjoyed the enclosure and really got a kick out of the water dripping and things. And I slowly watched him actually take a drink out of a leaf that on the ground had filled up with a little bit of the rainwater. It's so cool to see this little snake just checking out this new environment though, going from a sterile plastic tub that essentially had paper towel as substrate and a little bit of trellis as a perch into something that's way more close to what they'd actually be found in nature. Not only was it something that I really wanted to do is to have little tiny snakes in a really big box, but I also really excited about seeing the colour change that these little green tree pythons are going to go through, and I'm happy to be able to watch it in something like this versus a little plastic tub where they might all of a sudden turn green overnight and I completely miss it. So it'll be really cool to see these guys and document it as they go and just kind of see how they actually end up changing. And as I said previously, or I have said previously, I actually ended up keeping 2 of the most unpatterned babies and 2 of the most highly patterned babies. So I'm going to be interested to see how they kind of go and whether that actually has any sort of effect on how they turn out, whether they end up with more white spots, less white spots, any white spots, no white spots. You know, who knows? But that's just something that I'm going to have as a little fun experiment and, you know, with this tiny little sample size. Well guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video here. It was a good little build. I've really enjoyed these. I've enjoyed watching these snakes actually use these different perches, and you know, it's just awesome seeing these guys out of these little tiny plastic tubs and now into something that they can kind of grow up in for at least probably the next couple of years at this stage. We're going to have to see how they go, obviously feeding in the same tank. I have already fed them a couple of times in the same tank here and they seem to react okay. I just wait for when they're, you know, apart from each other so they're not right on top of each other, and I also do it at a time that I know that I'm going to be home so I can actually keep an eye on everything. So as always, if you did like this video, make sure to like the video, chuck it a comment down below as well, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more reptile related content, and don't forget to check me out over on Facebook and Instagram, and if you want to support the channel even further, over on Patreon and Teespring. Until next time guys, I'll catch you in the next video, and take it easy.